What is going on with Pokémon Remakes? This might seem like a silly question to some of you watching, seeing as how Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl came out less than 4 years ago as of making this video, so to the average consumer, nothing is really up with Pokémon Remakes. But undeniably, they have changed purposes in more ways than one since they first started all the way back in 2004. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and today let's break down the present and the future of Pokémon Remakes. But first we need to understand, why are Pokémon Remakes so popular to begin with? Sure, tons of video game studios and franchises remaster their old games and re-release them with updated graphics and minor quality of life tweaks, but a remaster is slightly different from a remake. So something like Wind Waker HD, that's a remaster. Metroid Prime Remastered? Remaster. Obviously. Xenoblade Definitive Edition? A little in the middle, but leaning more remaster. Persona 3 Reload? Now that's closer to an actual remake. Completely new remakes, where almost everything under the hood is redone, are definitely a lot rarer in the gaming industry. And I would say no Nintendo franchise at least releases full-on remakes with the same frequency as Pokémon. This began back in Generation 3 with Fire Red and Leaf Green, games that served the very simple purpose of helping to piece the National Pokédex back together on the Game Boy Advance, since it was impossible to transfer up old Pokémon from Gen 2 and the Game Boy Color. Game Freak and the Pokémon Company's goal was that between the Hoenn titles, Fire Red, Leaf Green, and even the compatible spin-offs of Colosseum and XD, that all the Pokémon could be brought into the new generation and beyond. Because putting them all in one game is too easy of a solution, I suppose. Not only that, but these remakes were also fairly easy to produce, as they could take the same coding from the Hoenn games and essentially just create new graphical assets to go on top of it. Not a whole lot of shuffling around would have to be done, and it would be a quick and easy way to update the old buggy Gen 1 Kanto games with modern day mechanics. Add on the allure of a quick 10 million sales before launching Gen 4, which would take an extra year of dev time due to it being the first games in the Nintendo DS, and the decision seemed obvious. For Gold and Silver, the decision to remake those games into Heart Gold and Soul Silver likewise seemed like an easy one. Johto was the only region not playable on the Nintendo DS with its backwards compatibility. Game Freak was once again taking an extra year to develop Generation 5, so why not go for another easy slam dunk to make a few $1 million? These games also incorporated some of the improvements and plot points found in Pokémon Crystal for a more overall enjoyable Johto experience. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were very similar in that regard. With the 3DS being a brand new console, the first region from the Game Boy era no longer playable on new hardware would be Hoenn. You could even still experience Kanto through the post-game of Heart Gold and Soul Silver since the 3DS was also backwards compatible. With this remake, all 6 regions at some point could be represented on new hardware in some way. But Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire also served a different purpose, as those games seeked to expand on the Mega Evolution lore introduced in Pokémon X and Y, which was presumably going to be done in Pokémon Z before they shelved it to work on Sun and Moon. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are just as much companion pieces to X and Y as they are remakes of Ruby and Sapphire. From that aspect alone, they seem pretty necessary. But the deviation began with Pokemon's next pair of remakes, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, as it appeared that these titles were developed without any clear purpose in mind other than squeezing as much money out of the Pokemon Go craze as possible. I guess, in fairness, it also served as Game Freak's first foray into developing for a home console, the Switch, even though the game is clearly still developed with mobile play in mind. But there was one very clear issue with Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. It didn't bring much of anything new to the table. I mean, yeah, there are Alolan forms here, and a physical special split which no Kanto-centric game had ever had before, but in terms of brand new content, Fire Red and Leaf Green offered so much more. You could catch dozens of Pokemon outside of the Kanto Pokédex in the postgame, you had a whole new archipelago of islands to explore, they had compatibility with the Hoenn-based games, they had a lot going for them over the originals. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, while containing some new content, in many ways feels like an overall regression from Fire Red and Leaf Green. And with that seed being planted, many fans began questioning just how necessary Pokemon remakes have become. Nevertheless, fans obviously remained incredibly anxious and excited for the day that a Sinnoh remake would be announced, not heeding the warnings that Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee had loudly made. And when those Sinnoh remakes were finally revealed, hey, that doesn't look anything like a Sword and Shield model. Yep, the inevitable had finally come to pass, as a core series Pokemon game will be outsourced to another studio for the first time ever. And honestly, even calling these titles remakes feels like a bit of a stretch when comparing them to previous remakes in the series, as the internal source code for these games is nearly identical to the original Diamond and Pearl. There are various glitches and typos from Diamond and Pearl that were fixed in Platinum that are actually recreated in this game because nothing was changed. It almost feels like these games were just kinda haphazardly thrown together at the last minute to promote a different game. Oh, that's funny, because that's actually 100% the case. According to a leaked presentation from the Game Freak Terra leak late last year, we can see that Game Freak never planned on remaking Diamond and Pearl, with this slide from the presentation saying, quote, "Considering previous development timing, a DP remake is possible, but this time we've decided to not create a proper remake that recreates the original using current technology. With an eye toward the next generation of Pokémon, we will be challenging ourselves to innovate in both gameplay and technology, and creating the technical foundation for future Pokémon titles." This is basically them saying we needed to create Legends Arceus in order to properly get a feel for how we make open world Pokemon games in the future, and we're willing to sacrifice this remake to meet that end. Considering that the statement was also made shortly after COVID started, you can certainly imagine how the pandemic also affected their timeline and plans for a Gen 4 remake. Several months after this statement is when Game Freak apparently first contacted ILCA about producing Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, as they evidently still felt that it was important for new fans to have the context of the original Sinnoh games before Legends Arceus was released. Some people have taken this evidence as Game Freak never intends to create another Pokemon remake, and we should just brace ourselves for ILCA slop for the rest of our lives, but no, they were just saying that given the circumstances, they didn't think it would be possible to remake Diamond and Pearl at that time. Legends was certainly the priority, understandably so. And hey, as much as I absolutely despise Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl for its many questionable decisions, with only a year and a half of dev time, ILCA certainly had a very limited timeline. But now, fast forward 4 years, and I can see why it looks like Game Freak will never remake another game. When everyone expected Johto or Unova remakes, we got yet another Legends game set in an entirely different region. This time, without a remake to precede it. Furthermore, the Terra Leak revealed not just tons of Game Freak's past plans and concepts, but even some of their future ones too. There were even a few tidbits about Gen 10 and other upcoming titles in there that I really don't want to get into because I actually have a decent relationship with the Pokemon Company for once in my life. But you know what there wasn't even a hint of in those leaked files and documents? That's right, a new remake. No Johto, no Unova, no nothing. They weren't scrapped, they weren't delayed, they simply just don't exist, at least not in Game Freak's studio. The only minor hint we've gotten since then is apparently one of the upcoming TCG sets in Japan is titled Black Bolt and White Flare, but I honestly wouldn't put too much stock into that. I mean, the set that's supposed to come out right before is a Team Rocket set, and I highly doubt they're pumping out another set of Kanto remakes. At least, I hope not. Also, it could most definitely just be related to the Indigo Disc or the Trainer's Pokemon gimmick that they're bringing back in the trading cards. I doubt it's anything substantial, especially when a ZA set hasn't even been trademarked yet. But on that note, what are some reasons that Pokemon would phase out remakes entirely? Well, first off, you have the very obvious fallout from the Diamond and Pearl remakes. And to a slightly lesser extent, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. And with remakes of Johto and Unova being next in line, games of the franchise that most fans would consider to be the absolute peak, it might be hard to live up to expectations. Even bigger than that though, the Legends series is shown to be an effective replacement for revisiting old settings with a new coat of paint instead of remakes. Now, granted, they don't show off everything. Legends ZA is supposedly just set in Lumiose City instead of all of Kalos, and even Legends Arceus leaves quite a few Sinnoh areas absent. But still, if their goal is to just give their creative minds a rest and reuse old material in new ways, Legends fulfills that goal pretty nicely. But of course, there are also numerous reasons why remakes will not be phased out. First and foremost, Game Freak just partnered with the developers of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl ILCA to create Pokémon Works. Boy, that's a bold name after Scarlet and Violet. And while Pokémon Works currently just services mobile games like Pokémon Home and Pokémon Sleep, it shows that Game Freak and ILCA are establishing a long-term relationship with one another. A marriage where one parent goes off to work, makes all the money, pays all the bills, and provides for all the children, while the other stays at home and makes their unimportant remakes for them. It's also worth noting that despite the massive controversies surrounding Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, those games still sold like hotcakes. They are by far the best-selling Pokemon remakes, like to the point where they might even sell more than the original Diamond and Pearl. Do you realize how insane that is? I know a lot of that can be attributed to the absolutely massive number of Switch players, but still. And no, they don't care if 90% of the player base never finished those games, they just care that you bought it. And why do people buy it? Because there will always be a market for Pokemon remakes, especially now. Have you noticed how incredibly expensive the old pre-Gen 6 Pokemon games have gotten since the pandemic? Simply put, the first half of the Pokemon franchise is probably the most inaccessible it's ever been. If you're a 6 to 15-year-old kid today, you know, like Pokemon's prime demographic, odds are you've never had your hands on Heart Gold or Black and White. They're just too expensive. Simply put, I don't think the Pokemon remakes are being produced to give old fans a nostalgia trip anymore. I think they're being made more for the new fans who never had a chance to experience the old games. I can also say this is probably the reason why Pokemon still refuses to work with Nintendo to put old school Pokemon games in the Nintendo Switch Online catalog. Because they know there are opportunities to remake those games and sell tons of copies in the future. And believe me, I bet Nintendo has asked. They want a cut of that sweet, sweet Pokemon money. And really, that's all the info you need to be assured the Pokemon remakes aren't going anywhere. Money talks. It is the ultimate driving force behind every decision they will ever make. For the first 3 remakes, you could argue that those were made out of necessity. For the last 2, it's very clear that it's just being done to keep the tradition alive and keep profits afloat. And honestly, as long as Game Freak keeps producing Legends games, I'm okay with them not entirely doing the remakes anymore. If they're all done by ILCA or jointly through Pokemon Works, that seems like a better solution than taking developers away from brand new titles that they desperately need. Personally, I don't think we're seeing another remake until 2027 or 2028 at the earliest, but don't worry, they'll come. It's just a matter of time. So with all that being said, what do you think the future holds for Pokemon remakes? Will it be Game Freak, ILCA, a mix of both, something different entirely? Let me know in the comment section down below. But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time.